Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of Off the Cuff. As per usual, this is a show in which an episode series thing where I just talk about stuff that's on my mind, stuff that's been going on in the last week or so, maybe longer, and it's really just off the cuff, so I'm not really planning a lot of it. There's not too much research done behind it, and so a lot of stuff I say it's not necessarily factually accurate. I do try to give some backing where I'm citing stuff and so on, but if I do state any facts that you think might be incorrect, then I'll either retract them or give my proof of the facts. But most of it's just because I like to talk about some of the stuff that I've been thinking about rather than keep it to myself, because I've noticed that I have a tendency to keep it to myself and then no one else hears what I'm actually thinking. Because I know that tons of people care what I think. No, it's really because I'd like to get my own thoughts out there and see what people think, see if anyone disagrees, and just get a discussion going, and maybe bring some light to some things that people haven't even realized or thought of. Now, the first thing I've got to talk about this week is definitely much later than I meant to. I meant to actually do a video series thing on Sunday, and then that didn't happen, so I was going to go for the normal Wednesday. That didn't happen, so here we are today, finally having my episode up. So the first thing I'm going to address is the big elephant in the room, Panodrama. So Tommy Robinson last Saturday did this whole his big event in was it Salford, that was it, and he it was definitely an interesting event. He had some delays in starting the documentary. He had some other people. I believe he had some other people come on. I've seen many different theories on why it was delayed. Everyone was saying, "Oh, he clearly didn't plan it properly." Now, I believe people at face value unless I have some compelling evidence to dissuade or to disprove. I'll believe people when they tell me something. Unless I have reason to believe otherwise. So when Tommy says that he had technical issues, that they were trying to make a documentary in 2 weeks, so that's why, and they had like a lot of issues trying to get it ready, they were sleeping nights and all that, I can see that. Preparing a documentary it's like an hour-long documentary in 2 weeks, that's not easy. And you got to do a lot of collecting of different stuff, you got to do a lot of research, you got to talk to a lot of people. And it seems like they did a pretty good job. So I saw the documentary. Now, the first thing that's definitely a major issue there is the whole thing around John Sweeney. So I think it kind of goes without saying John Sweeney was definitely up to some dirty stuff. Now, I looked into John Sweeney's past, and I was reading about he did a documentary in Zimbabwe, and he was having to sneak around, hiding in trunks of cars and all that. And so I'm pretty impressed by those kind of credentials. But I think that he definitely did a botched job with this Tommy Robinson thing. He kind of went in ready to take him down, ready to show how horrible Tommy Robinson is, without even considering that he might be right. Which is, it's not a great way to go do a coverage of something, deciding what your bias is beforehand. And especially for Panorama, who are supposed to be, they're supposed to be investigative. Not, I don't know what word to use here, but not trying to create the narrative before they've investigated. Now, there's been a lot of questions of the evidence that was shown in the Panodrama documentary. I will say it's definitely questionable. There was someone who's saying that the guy there was a guy who works for Lawrence Southern now, used to work for Tommy Robinson, and apparently Hope Not Hate, someone from Hope Not Hate sexually assaulted him or sexually abused him, and so there's definitely that's a major accusation. So there's definitely some worry around that. And I'm not so sure, because someone said that that guy who said this sexual assault has retracted his accusation. I'm not so sure how true that is. I'm going to need to see some sort of evidence, not just people flinging words about it. What we do have is a recording from the guy saying that he was sexually assaulted. So, that's kind of one side of the evidence. A lot of Tommy Robinson's documentary was hearsay, but my take on this whole thing is that this was never about Tommy Robinson actually proving corruption, and maybe it is. Maybe he's actually proven something. He doesn't have to prove that they've definitely done major corruption. He just has to prove that they're not impartial, which is already corrupted because BBC is, government funded. So yeah, and but I think that this was really about Tommy Robinson basically stealing the story. They had this whole story, they're ready to Tommy take down, they're ready to take him down, and he's just shown that he can take their story and turn it around. Which is done, honestly, I think it was done really brilliantly. And another thing that actually I think was all about is, it doesn't matter whether or not there's evidence, because a lot of people aren't driven by evidence these days. There's a lot of emotion-driven arguments, and people are already angry at the BBC. All they need to see is that the BBC is not treating Tommy fairly. Even if there's no evidence behind their things or Tommy's things, they just need to see that BBC is being unfair. And individuals will decide their case, which is where we come to the conclusion of the Panodrama scenario, where Tommy basically said, scrap the license fee. He said, let's get rid of it. Let's stop paying for your license fee. And, there's plenty of ways to do that without breaking the law. I've stopped paying my TV license because I actually don't watch TV. So, I don't see any reason why not to keep paying your TV license. Of course, there's the political reasons as well. BBC being biased and various just propaganda. Honestly, it's basically propaganda. So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said there. Now, following that, there's been something interesting that happened. So, within 24 hours, or about 24 hours after the Panodrama situation, Tommy Robinson was taken off Facebook and Instagram, naturally, because Instagram's owned by Facebook. But, he's been doing the same thing for months and months and months and months, if not years, and Facebook hasn't had a problem. Now, literally the day after Panodrama, suddenly he's taken off. There is a major connection there. I can see some correlation there myself. And Facebook has said, it's because of stuff he said, and they've given various evidence. And I've not looked into it too much, if I'm honest, because I just not at the time. But I did read someone was saying that some of the stuff that they got Tommy on was extreme without context. And then another one was saying that it wasn't even something Tommy said. It was someone on Tommy's page who commented something, and Facebook used that to take him down, which is ridiculous. But worse than that, Facebook has taken down the accounts of people who support Tommy Robinson. I actually know a few of them, and I'm a supporter of Tommy Robinson, so I'm surprised they haven't been taken down. But basically, anyone who's shown active endorsement of Tommy Robinson was taken down. So it is absolutely ridiculous. Apparently, I believe the reason the charge on Tommy was being a part of organized hate or organizing hate. So that's a bit ridiculous, really. And the people supporting Tommy Robinson shouldn't have been taken down because, frankly, that's not how you do things. Just guilt by association is wrong. It's just flat out wrong, because you're not free if you're going to be judged by who you associate with. You can only think of how open that is to issues. Technically, John Sweeney is associated with Tommy Robinson. He was trying to make a documentary about him. He's talking to his friends. You could cast a story any way, so long as the guilt by association allows for sort of subjective analysis there. Now, if you're working together to do the same thing, where it becomes you're actually working together to run a project, to do something like a hate crime or to commit a crime, rob a bank, if you're working together and you're actually communicating about the thing, yes. But if you're just supporting someone for what they're saying, but you're not saying it yourself or actually just, and they haven't said anything wrong, then, that's fine. People shouldn't be charged or guilty for associating with people. That's just the way it goes. And if you're going to apply guilt to people based on the people they associate with, then I will tell you that is a major slippery slope. That is so open to so many problems. But, if you're listening to my videos, you probably don't. If you do, please do give me your reasons why. I'd love to have a discussion about it. Leave it down in the comments. Moving on, I've been not following it too actively, but I've kind of been a bit gobsmacked by the discussions on what's going on with Brexit. Because they had Brexit no deal, that's the way it's going, there's going to be a Brexit no deal. And then the next thing I heard off that, there's like, okay, we're taking no deal off the table, that's it, no deals, no deal. And then it's, okay, well, no, actually, forget about that, we're going to have a second referendum. So, I can see why people are feeling a bit, unstable about the future. Because if you can't decide what the hell you're doing, then no wonder people have trouble. You know, they keep saying how businesses are going to struggle because of Brexit, or businesses are struggling because of Brexit. Well, of course they are. You can't make up your bloody mind. If you're trading with people in the EU and you're like, okay, well, either I am going to be able to keep trading with them the same as I already am because we're not leaving, or we are going to leave and I'm going to have to change my plans or, you know, adapt them, or we're going to have another referendum and I might have a different deal than I already was going to have. You know, if you're a business, you can't really keep up. And a lot of businesses have coped well. They have planned around this. But in this case, you know, people have a limit in how many options they can foresee or plan for. So, you know, what are they supposed to do there? So another thing I wanted to talk about was this guy, Vladimir Bukovsky. So this video was going around the last few weeks. I think it's quite an old video. It's from 2006, I believe, originally. So it's over 10 years ago. And this guy was just talking about how he is surprised. He is a bit shocked. He's from Russia. He's a bit shocked by people embracing the EU, because he talks about how a lot of the stuff that he saw in Russia and the Soviet Union is really just being recreated in a different way, in a different form in the EU, and people are just happy to embrace it. And I've actually been having discussions with a few people lately. Myself, I've been having a few conversations with, I don't know if you can call them friends, but acquaintances about this. You know, just about the EU. And I've got to say that the praise they have for the EU is ridiculous. Honestly, I mean, I like Britain. It's a great nation, but I don't praise it like it's an amazing and a benevolent kingdom who looks over us and protects us. But, you know, I was talking to this guy and he's going on about how the EU is so that they have this consensus and benevolence. Well, no, he didn't say benevolence. He said consensus and determination in how they've acted and the way they conduct business is so much more ordered. I'm like, yes, you're correct. It is ordered because they have to be ordered. It's ordered by law. It's ordered by the entire structure of the system. But order is not always a good thing. The EU is great in some ways. You know, I believe they forced the EU. They forced the USB. They forced the USB to be used in devices, which is great because, you know, now you have this consensus. But what happens when something comes to replace the USB? Because one of the things that's great about a chaotic market, about a proper free market, is that businesses can disrupt each other. But I think the EU is not one for disruption. And that is evident. And there's plenty of evidence to show that the EU has been deceitful, manipulative, and has manipulated the market to suit itself. So I find it very peculiar and fascinating that people adore the EU so much, because I do not think it has that much to offer. Really, it's a bit of a sad state, really, because I mean the EU is not even a nation in itself. And there is this weird move towards a sort of joined up sort of union, where you stop being a union, you start being a nation in itself. I always chuckled when I first heard the term member states, because I started to think, okay, well, states of what? You get conglomerates, you get unions, you know, the UN, the United Nations, still refers to individual nations. NATO, I believe, also refers to individual nations. And the EU has member states. So to me, it's already trying to become a nation in itself. Now to move on to another thing that I was reminded of and brought to my attention again, is this, it's this thing called bullshit jobs. Back in 2013, this guy, whose name I've just forgotten, I think it was David Graeber, or Grieber, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I'll just get his name. Yes, David Graeber. He wrote this On the Phenomenon of Bullshit Jobs, a Work Rant by David Graeber. And he just went on about how jobs, a lot of kind of bullshit jobs have been created. And there's all this sort of love for these jobs, because it feels like you've got to work. And I've always found this interesting. I believe I mentioned this in a previous episode when I was talking about how technology could replace jobs, and people are very fearful of that. But what I was trying to explain why they shouldn't be. And I just find it really fascinating. So this whole article, he just talks about how back in the 60s, people started to posit that we would have jobs, the amount of hours we had to work would decrease. We would have to stop worrying so much about working 40 hours a week. We'd be able to start working like 15 hours a week, and we could just start, relaxing, because technology was starting to replace all the labor that needed to be done. And what's happened is that I believe managerial roles and executive roles have increased insanely since the 60s. I think he said it was like 300% that some of the executive roles. But the main thing is they've gone from being a quarter of the jobs, I believe, to 3/4 of the work of the job of the industries of the market. Now think about that. Imagine you're in a company. You got one developer and 3 managers. Doesn't make sense, does it? So I find that fascinating that there's so many managerial roles. Now, David Graeber, he separates them into 5 categories, which I'll just quickly cover here. So he talks about flunkies, which are jobs who serve to make their superiors feel important. And his examples are receptionists, administrative assistants, and door attendants. And he just kind of talks about these are people who, you're not a big executive unless you have these things. They're there to make you feel important. Then you got goons, who are people who act aggressively on behalf of their employer. For example, lobbyists, corporate lawyers, telemarketers, public relations specialists. I could add in there search engine optimization companies, but So goons are kind of, they don't have to exist. They mainly exist because other companies have them. It's this peculiar cycle that goes on. Another one was duct tapers, which are roles who ameliorate preventable problems, like airline desk staff who calm passengers whose bags don't arrive, or programmers who repair shoddy code. I'm sorry about that. That's my fault there. Then you got box tickers who use paperwork or gestures as a proxy for action. So the example he gives here are performance managers, in-house magazine journalists, leisure coordinators. I think I could think of many other roles like this, where you got someone who just, I think the one story I heard about was this guy who literally was standing in the queue in an airport telling people which way to go, left or right. And the main job consisted of holding an iPad with an arrow that pointed left or right. And they'd just point in the direction that the iPad was pointing at. And if you moved before they had told you to, they'd get annoyed with you. But they could just have the iPad propped up there telling people, And the last role is taskmasters, which are people who manage or create extra work for those who don't need it. So his examples are middle management and leadership professionals. Now, I've actually encountered some roles like this, sometimes useful, sometimes not useful. So I've encountered some project managers who at times give me work like give me time estimates for the work that we're going to be doing. Now, that's useful because we're going to have to quote for the job. Other times, the same person might ask me to categorize the work I'm doing into different columns or something like that. And that's not for me, that's for them. They don't have a job to do, so they're giving me a job to do. And I don't need them to do the time estimates because I've got to do the time estimates in the end. I can just present them to the client myself, which I actually do in my own freelance work anyway. So he's got these 5 categories. Now, David Graeber does explicitly state that, if you feel your job is important, it's not necessarily it doesn't make it, if it's classed as a bullshit job, but you don't feel like it's a bullshit job, that can more or less mean it's not a bullshit job because it means something to you. But he says just that he's met a lot of people. He got them to all mail him, and he found that basically a lot of people just feel like they're doing nothing in the day. They're just passing their time just filling time browsing Facebook and Instagram, or in my case, Imager might be the case. But I've actually got productive work I do. At least I feel that way. And it's an interesting theory, because it really makes me think about this whole thing where we don't have to be working as much as we do. We only do work as much as we do to fill the working force, to fill the labor force, to make it feel like we're creating jobs. It's like, yes, you can create a job by putting 2 cashiers on that register instead of 1. But, that's going to be a waste of time for one of them. Hell, you might not even need a cash register person, because you've now got the self-checkout machines. So technology is making life easier, but people don't seem to want that to happen. So, yeah, the reason I bring this up is because I just found out that David Graeber actually released a book last year called Bullshit Jobs, and it's definitely worth a read, as well as the article. I'll leave a link in the description about that. And, yeah, I just find it, it's definitely been an interesting week, because this whole thing about the Panodrama thing going on and the Facebook bannings, it feels like everything's coming to a head. Everything's kind of reaching a peak point, and it just feels that way. And I might be wrong. I've often had this in the past where it's been my perception that everything is going chaotic or crazy, but it's all just in my head. So maybe not. We'll have to see. Now, as well as one more thing I wanted to discuss, talk about, was just going back to that discussion I was having with this person about immigration. Well, actually, we were talking about the EU. They were kind of praising the EU. But the discussion started on immigration. And we were just talking about, the discussion started on controlled or uncontrolled immigration. And my main point of the argument, my perception that I was approaching it from, was largely the approach that Lauren Southern has found herself in, when she's actually gone and travelled with people moving across the borders, moving to the EU, trying to make their way from Africa and such. And she actually travelled with her crew, with them on the ground. And she just felt so much despair, because these people are so ambitious and so hopeful about the lives they're going to lead. But ultimately, they're all being taken advantage of, because the EU is letting people in, and then we've got to try and find places for them, and we do have a struggling system. It's not economically possible. It's not economically possible to keep that many people on board, and it's just going to sink the ship of our economy. And on the other hand, these people are leaving their countries, giving up all their possessions to make their way to the EU, and they're finding that they're being taken advantage of. They're finding that they shouldn't have come because their life's not as great as they thought. And ultimately, the only people who profit out of this is the people who are trafficking others out of Africa into the EU. And so we really lose out there. There's a lot of people losing out, and it doesn't make anyone's lives better, ultimately. I mean, yes, the traffickers, the human traffickers, they can benefit from it, but it really, really ruins the lives of many. So that's why I felt that controlled immigration is important. And also because you don't have a right to move into someone else's country. This is from the more aggressive argument. You don't have a right to move into someone else's country. They have to want to let you in, because they've got a country to run. If you've got if you run a business and anyone who wants to can come work for your business and you get no say in it, and you have to pay them, then your business is going to sink. And that's not the best analogy, I know that, but this is off the cuff, So, controlled immigration tends to work better, because honestly, you need to be able to decide who's coming into your country. There's people you need, and as well, those people, say the doctors and engineers who are leaving their countries, are leaving their countries. If you tell someone, "Hey, come to our country. We've got all this free housing and then benefits, and healthcare," and yes, the people are willing to work when they come over, that just means you've just made a better business offer, which, yes, is great if you're running a business for profit. But if those people then come over and they can't get a job because you've now contested the market by bringing in millions of people, and now the wages have gone down because there's plenty of options for people looking to hire, they've got plenty of plenty to choose from. So not everyone's going to get a job then. So they just left their country where they were maybe a respected doctor who had a good job, and maybe it wasn't great, but it's definitely better than no job. And then those people who couldn't get a job now are having to struggle. And, there's various studies that have shown that the biggest people impacted by the immigration crisis, the large amounts of immigration, the people who are most likely to be displaced by legal immigration, actually legal immigration is all right. But illegal immigration is massively affecting... I got that the wrong way around there. Immigration from within the EU is fine. It doesn't actually affect the country too much. But immigration coming from outside of the EU is massively impacting the working class. Lower wage jobs specifically. So, yeah, it doesn't work out. Not for the immigrants and not for the people who are having their jobs replaced. And ultimately, if you want to get the most amount of suffering, you let everyone in. Because if you're running a business, I like to use the house example because people don't actually like, you can't just go into someone's house and start eating their food. They're not okay with that. So if you just let everyone into your house, they're not going to be happy. There's not going to be enough food. There's not going to be enough space. There's not going to be enough beds. And ultimately, some of those people might not care about keeping up and keep looking after things. That's not to say they all don't. I've moved here from a different country, but I believe in working hard, and I know that a lot of other immigrants do as well. But if you just let anyone in, you don't get to pick the ones that are there to work hard. That's all for me from this episode. I'll be back next week with more stuff to talk about, and hopefully I'll be able to follow up over the weekend with another update on my representation map application. Till next week, hopefully, or till this weekend. If you have any opinions on some of the stuff I stated, please leave a comment below. Definitely love to get a discussion going. And we'll see how that goes.